Good morning.
Oh my God, you sound so bright. Good morning. How are you doing?
Really? Okay, that's
Oh,
good.
oh, I've had absolute chaos this morning here, Josh. The dog sitter was late, and I was like, please tell me they haven't forgotten her, because that dog kicks off. So it's been absolutely insane. Just managed to log on in time. Welcome, Josh. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, not a problem. It's a pleasure as always.
Oh, thank you. Right. Let's kick off with that. Well, we're going to focus primarily on your choices anyway today, but let's start off with the MP crossing the aisle.
Yeah. So he's the first, and then I'd read that there's 5 more apparently considering something similar. But the main thing, and I've literally seen nobody mention this, is just the sheer idea that you can cross, like, ideologically from one side of the political spectrum to the other in the space of 5 seconds, and the Labour Party can raise zero questions about how you've suddenly made this wonderful turnaround where you're now just apparently going to oppose everything the Conservatives have done, having spent however many years.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, it is, as you say, it is a huge ideological shift. And I noted one of your tweets, which was about the 5 more Conservative MPs, and you said it's a one-party state, and that really is what we're dealing with now, isn't it, Josh?
Yeah, and it's just more proof that realistically the vast majority of our MPs are basically all aligned on, I would say, most major issues. The culture war stuff that they all like to pretend are the big issues, they will focus on 100%. They're massive differences, but when it really comes down to brass tacks and the economics of what they both believe, they're both in the exact same part of neoliberalism.
It's ridiculous, and that is exactly what it is. Neoliberalism. That's exactly what it is, and it's a ridiculous state of affairs. Do you think that just Corbyn was the real deal?
Yeah, I actually do. I was having this conversation with one of my friends who was not a Corbyn fan, so we have a lot of banter about it sometimes. But he has finally conceded that the best part was he was just a harmless old man. was his description. He didn't like Jeremy Corbyn,
right?
But that's as close to him admitting as is ever going to happen that he wouldn't have been just another establishment stooge. And I think that's the reason that I thought he would have been a great leader for the country. And I'm sure many other people would likely agree.
Right. Well, not Luggerbugs. He says, nope, Corbyn is establishment and cozies up to the murderers. Oh, goodness me. Chris said, I liked Corbyn. So that's at least 2 saying completely different things, and so much the better for it, frankly, because the whole point about this is, like, freedom of opinion, freedom of expression. That's what we're here for. So, Josh, this all obviously kicked off over the whole Partygate thing. What are your thoughts about that? Why have we only just heard about this 2 years on?
I find it stunning that all of the journalists in Westminster had no knowledge of any of these parties. It's like, are you seriously telling me that all of these journalists are so incompetent and so unable to figure out what's going on in Westminster in the midst of lockdowns and not very much like actual activity happening beyond Zoom calls, that none of them had an inkling that this had happened? And even if they did, that they chose not to seek out any information about it. And I suspect it's because most of them were either at the parties or throwing similar ones themselves.
Right, exactly. I keep asking LBC to confirm whether Rachel Johnson was at parties over Christmas or not, because I was at a recent recording with Rachel Johnson in which she slipped up and talked about getting in through the security gates with Nimco Ali, who is Carrie Johnson's best mate, over Christmas. And I was like, okay, oh, that's really interesting. So I keep asking that because she's obviously used her LBC platform to say, my brother sticks by the rules. Never does he break the rules. La, 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 la. Listen, Rachel, let's find out whether you broke the rules, shall we? Because I'm desperate to find that out. Because LBC are so totalitarian about all of this. Nick Ferrari, I think, wants people fined. Sheila Fogarty wants people poisoned. And James O'Brien, I think, is certainly, or, you know, pro-mask and everything. And so LBC is very much on this, but Rachel is not fessing up, in my opinion. So I think we need to get to the bottom of that. So obviously, this is all as a consequence as well of what's been going on this week. COVID restrictions being lifted in England. Thank God, children's masks no longer need to wear them in school. Thank God that, as far as I was concerned, and every expert that I talked to, was child abuse. And scrapping of the vaccine passports. Well, the same is happening in NI, right?
Yeah, we're a little like about a week behind. So most of our restrictions are going on Wednesday of next week, which is just fantastic to see, because the hospitality industry. So I worked in quite a lot of restaurants and bars when I was at school and uni and stuff. So I know quite a lot of people in that industry in Belfast, and they were just getting hammered. Like the second that those passports got introduced, they got absolutely decimated. And it's so good to see that at least some semblance of like reasonableness has returned, and they thought, okay, for whatever reason, like, I mean, the reasons you could speculate like wildly, but there's definitely been a huge backtracking over the past week, and it's unbelievable to watch. Like the people who were most in favor of the passports in Northern Ireland suddenly are calling for the government to have a clear roadmap out of lockdowns and everything. I'm like, it was like, so do you just expect us to pretend that you weren't like the person who's caused all this damage?
Right. That is literally what grinds my gears, is that we have like Jeremy Vine suddenly tweeting, you know, sympathetic articles about what the sort of the devastation lockdown has caused. You are culpable, Mr. Vine. You, Piers Morgan, or people like you who ramped it up. It was so scary, Josh. And now that obviously, you know, these people aren't idiots. They're in their position because they know how to switch and turn very quickly as the sort of mood takes. And Piers Morgan is the same. Suddenly, Piers Morgan is questioning people who have died with COVID and of COVID, something that I myself and others were doing 2 years ago, you know, almost 2 years ago. It's a bit late to be doing that now. Some people are of the mind, Josh, that it's like, okay, better late than never. But I'm of the mind that you're only doing this because you see which way the direction of travel is going and you don't want to be left out in the cold. And I think that they are hugely responsible for what we've been going through, Josh.
Yeah, I'm in two minds about it, because at one point, on one side, I'm thinking, okay, you know, this. For me, it's fantastic to see, and you know, the power of both like momentum and just like people. They're kind of once like an idea gets rolling and starts to like become sort of more widely accepted, there's like a tipping point, at which point it's like, okay, this is now, I don't know, in the public psyche is like the way it is, essentially. And I think we saw that happen quite a lot with a lot of the COVID restrictions. That like people would like hear that this was the way it was, and then, you know, they would like internalize it, slowly accept, and be like, well, okay, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's like now happening with people realizing that perhaps, you know, lockdowns are not a good idea, and that a lot of the measures we took were perhaps ineffective, and definitely not thought out in terms of their consequences. And that's the big problem, really, is that, you know, all the decisions that we made had huge trade-offs. Like you can't just make massive sweeping changes to the way like lives function without like huge trade-offs. And ultimately, I think many of them are starting to realize that those trade-offs were not considered.
Right.
And but once that is like realized by like a certain number of people, you go, okay, momentum means it's going to be very difficult to go backwards on this. and
Right.
we're moving in a good direction. But at the same time, I'm also like, you can't just stand there and now suddenly pretend like you weren't totally in favor of all of these things that have caused all of this, untold levels of
Exactly.
damage.
And demonize those of us who were daring to ask questions. And that's
Mm,
all people like
yeah.
I were doing. And we got demonized. Boris Johnson authorized £126 million to be paid for a campaign which demonized anybody asking questions about the mRNA. That's an outrageous use of public funds. And of course, we had the guy from Number 10's Nudge Unit last week come out in Unheard and say, look, they overdid it. They over-egged the pudding. They scared you all too much. I mean, it's outrageous. The manipulation of a nation it's appalling. I don't even know what this is going to do to our psychology in the long run, because we are changed as a people. We've got to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, and this isn't to minimize like any of the damage that's been done. I'm lucky enough to not have to worry about like any kids or anything in my life.
Right.
I'm very thankful. I'm lucky I wasn't at university, but I feel like I came out of this 2 years like way smarter and way sharper and just way more resilient in terms of, it's like, right, okay, before the pandemic, it's like I was skeptical about the government. And now I'm like, these people need to have all of the restraints physically possible put on their power. They and I feel like that was an important realization.
Massive.
I struggle to believe that I'm the only person that has realized,
No.
because I used to listen to, say, people like Jordan Peterson or talk about the dangers of totalitarianism and how close all of us are to that without really like ever noticing or realizing. And you had talked about like being able to like look and stare into, like, think about what you would have done in those dark times. And I think this is given like at least a glimpse into how rapidly we can imitate a totalitarian state.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
And
it was
yeah,
easy.
yeah.
I
And
mean,
that's,
yeah. It
scary.
is, but it's great. The realization is happening all across the world, because exactly, Angie says you're not the only person, Josh, and that's exactly right. I know people, very conventional people, Josh, 2.5 children, 9 to 5, not looking down on any of those things at all, but just, they go about their life in a conventional manner and they're happy to do so, who have never questioned these things, but it's become so transparent, so in our face, that things don't make sense. And that's the thing, is people are feeling it on a gut level. They're like, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't feel right. We were told that the jabs would free us. Now we've discovered we need 2, 3, 4 boosters and more. And you have lunatics like Vanessa Feltz saying, shoot me up with 27 injections. And she is a lunatic, I should say, Josh. She was there when we did that recording with Rachel Johnson, and I fell out with all of them because I dared to criticize Boris Johnson and say he was notoriously lazy. And Vanessa Feltz lost her shit. And she was like, you can't say he's lazy. And I'm like, oh, God's sake, get a grip. All these people were piling in on me for saying that the Prime Minister was lazy. Anyway, by the by, but I love those sort of things. I love to be able to tell you all about those sort of things as well. It's like an insight into the madness of those people. The other thing, Josh, that people are concerned about in the comments, and I am too, is that this announcement is just another way of it. It's what Dr. Bruce Scott, who comes on Rise, calls menticide. And menticide is where they basically do one thing and say another, or they do things like say you must wear masks, and then suddenly you see all of them, including the Queen, all gathered together without masks on. And it's to say, we are higher than you, we're more superior to you. And that's known as menticide in psychology. And so the worry is they're just going to flip this round again, because you remember Nadine Zawi was saying there's absolutely nothing we're going to do about COVID passports. The next thing we see, they're putting out tenders for it on their websites. So do you worry this might be another ruse?
Yeah, I mean, it is in the back of my head, but I feel like they suffered horrendously so they gave us Freedom Day or whatever in the summer, and then to bring some of the restrictions back, like they were really suffering in the opinion polls. Like I think we saw over sort of Christmas time was the first time that the public, at least in the polls, was a majority were opposed to further restrictions. And that was a real tipping point, because that is what has been guiding government policy for basically the entire pandemic, is like what the people will accept. It's been nothing to do, as far as I can tell, with whatever sort of new, well, obviously there's been a pattern of the way some of the measures have rolled out, but that's not been, I think, the driving factor in what different countries have done. I think it's been a case of what will they accept. And yet there's been a lot of opinion polling, and that's not unique to the United Kingdom either. I've seen stories like that in places like Canada, in like California, loads of places where it's been driven by public opinion. So now that the public are having this realization that there was a huge cost to these decisions, I think it will be increasingly difficult to backtrack on it, especially when you see that like the entire machine all suddenly like backpedaling like I've never seen. People like Hillary Jones, Stephen Nolan, like people who have like really hammered hard and like used really outrageously inflammatory language towards people who decided they didn't want to take the vaccine for whatever reason. And to watch them now suddenly have to like really like change their tune in a matter of weeks is I think an indication that the tide has turned. Like these people they're not leaders, they're followers. You know, they you know, they smell which way the wind's blowing and dash to pretend they were running first.
Yeah, exactly. Esther says, oh my God, the show has exploded. What is going on today? Yeah, it's wonderful. We've got so many new viewers this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Esther also wants to know if Josh is single. He says he has no children. Right, Josh, I can't do anything about Esther or any of them that have a crush on you. So listen, let's talk about, because you said something really interesting to me, and you thought that the Belfast Civic Dollars program may potentially be the start of a social credit system. Well, that's very concerning. Tell us more.
Yeah, so I had this woman, Melissa Chimay, on my show. I recording during the week, so I think I'm going to put it out this week. So we talked a lot about what was underlying the vaccine passport system. So we talked about its capability to have like a digital ID already, like it's already built in underneath that can be set in. But we also talked about this program that's been underway since 2016 in Northern Ireland that will centralize all of your data, your medical records, your financial records, your criminal records, all into one like central like system. And we talked about the Smart Cities initiative, of which Belfast has been picked by the World Economic Forum to be one of their leading smart cities.
Interesting.
And then we looked at this program that has been introduced called Civic Dollars. So essentially, it's like you'll sign up, and then if you go to say Ormeau Park in Belfast, you can like spend some time there, and you earn like your little digital Civic Dollars, and then you can spend them to like either tip local businesses or like book say basketball courts and things like that. And because we talked a lot about how the vaccine passports were ultimately not about health whatsoever. It was about bringing in this digital ID system, or this system where it doesn't have to be as insidious when it's put in place. So you can have the vaccine passports, you know, under the guise of, okay, we're going to make sure people aren't infected, or you know, well, yeah,
for the public good.
Yeah, for the public good. You know, it's always for the good.
It's always for the public good, and they always use it in terms of health, because that has been proven to be the most powerful in terms of propaganda.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. So essentially, we were looking at like what is underlying all this, and the vaccine passports are a system by which the government has a central control by which they can grant access to society, in which they will change definitely the criteria on a whim, as many countries have already done, moving from, you know, say you can take a test, do you have to be vaccinated, do you have to be boosted, do you have to be quadruple like jabbed, and all the way up. And that doesn't end there. The government never ends there. It never stops. And we were basically talking about what underlies all these things. And then we saw the Civic Dollars program, and we were really talking about what is this laying in to our system. It's laying in a way by which you're being financially rewarded for doing the things that the state wants, and being rewarded digitally, where is an even more terrifying part when you consider that, you know, the Bank of England wants to bring in their central bank digital currency that will be programmable and trackable, and that will be able to be, you know, determine what you can spend your money on. They'll be able to see exactly where you're spending your money. They'll be able to grant you more money depending on your behavior, and that just becomes an amount of power that no person, system, government, corporation, any of them should ever have. That is just too dangerous to like human democracy and freedom, and it needs to be opposed and called out. And it's all being laid out in front of us without our discussion or vote or even understanding that that's what's happening. Like this program, where everything will be centralized into one system, the Civic Dollars, the influence of the World Economic Forum on the Smart Cities initiative, all of these things are happening. It's not on the front page of the Belfast Telegraph, and it's not being discussed in the Times. It's not being discussed on BBC News. This is all just like sliding in, and we really need to consider like what this means. Like maybe that's the way we want to go. Okay, sweet. Like let's talk about it.
Yeah. Well, it's the not talking about it that is problematic, obviously, because then it suggests something really nefarious. And I mean, it's interesting because some of the comments are saying, no, all of this was all planned in response to you saying that they test us to see how far they can go. And I think it's actually both. I think both work together. And I think it's very interesting that England now has less restrictions than pretty much anywhere else in the world, in the Western world that we know about. And the pushback has been amazing. And there's going to be tomorrow worldwide protests out there. I'm going to be at the London one. And it's, you know, it's just people coming together. Because the thing is, even though England appears to be okay, the rest of the world isn't. And it's not okay that we're all right and our brothers and sisters elsewhere aren't. So we all have to sort of rise together for it. But I do think that it is actually a combination of two. And I think the pushback is important because some people get really defeatist about these things, Josh, and they're like, it's already laid out. We can't do anything about it. No, we mustn't get like that, because that's when they've got us, right? That's when we just roll over and just give up all our civil liberties and our freedoms and everything. The whole idea of smart cities just unnerves me, Josh. What does that actually mean?
You see, like, right, this is like part of the issue, because sometimes it can sound really crazy when you talk about this, because on their own, all of the programs that they're proposing are not necessarily like a bad thing. Like a centralized place where all your medical records are stored is a great idea. You know, if you go to a hospital, you know, anywhere in the UK, for example, all of your digital records are there. Your doctor immediately has access to it. There's so much we can learn from like large scale, like analysis of medical records, but that could totally be anonymized. There's I don't see like any issue with people being able to use digital currencies to pay for things. There's nothing wrong, as far as I can tell, with like systems being integrated, with like being able to like use your phone to scan yourself into places. Like all of these things by themselves are not bad things. Ultimately, they might make humans' lives easier. The problem is that they're being ushered in with a system that is all about centralized control. And that is where it becomes really insidious and really dangerous, because no one should have that amount of power.
No,
that's
exactly.
Just it's just like, that's it. Like simply put it, like, and that's the thing that I try to continue to reiterate to people who don't really agree with me on a lot of these things, because Matthias Desmet from the University of Ghent, one of the professors who has been talking a lot about mass formation psychosis, who I will actually also be having on my show next week.
I should just say, anybody who's not familiar with Joss, he is the editor of the Jist, Jist, and the author of Brexit, the Establishment Civil War, which is absolutely worth reading. And I'll put a link in the description at the end of the show. So go on, carry on, Josh.
Oh, thank you. Yes, and my show is called Chatter. It's on YouTube and Spotify, Apple as well. He has spoken about what's happened over the past 2 years, but also about this idea of mass formation psychosis, where people just get like in uncertain times, they look to someone to come along and say, I'm going to fix it all. You know, if they look for the potentially the big strong man to come and protect them from all the enemies. They look for the guy or the girl to come and like sort out all their problems. They say, I'm going to do it. I've got this. Just you give me all the power and I will fix it. And that is not a new story in human history. When I first heard him talking about it, I was immediately thinking about the way that Trump supporters view Donald Trump. You know, he was great in that he's, stuck it to the establishment, but he was in power for 4 years and failed to do basically anything about big tech. That was his big enemy, and he failed to do anything about it. And his supporters won't accept it. It's because he is the big guy who came along in the uncertain times to save them. And the same thing has happened with Fauci and the whole, like, I don't know, COVID establishment. I don't know how you just describe them, but they've come along and said, hey, just give us all the power and we'll fix it. We'll take away all these problems. And the way to combat that is to offer both a positive vision of how it might be better and to like point out that the authoritarianism that has come along with this is more dangerous than the virus itself. And that is the part that needs to be like constantly reiterated.
Right there. What you just said, that is exactly what needs to be constantly reiterated. Josh, I hate to cut you there, but we've got one more story. Do you think you can explain it to us in 2 minutes, which is about obviously the Chinese funding of UK tech?
Okay, so the advert I saw was on Reddit, really strangely, and it was about it was an advert about UK businesses getting investment from China. And so I spent quite a lot of time looking through the page, and essentially it's the UK government both advertising that you might want to get investment from China, but then about 50% of the site is them being like, but watch out, they're going to steal your intellectual property if you're not careful. And it's such a weird paradox where they're both advertising this as an option and then saying, but they're going to steal all your intellectual property. And they cite a case study on the site about a Chinese company that might have links to the communist state and could be involved in corporate espionage. And I'm like, that is all of them. There's literally all of them. Like, this is not like maybe a few companies have involvement from the Chinese Communist Party. It's like, it's all of them. All of them. Stop being so naive. So
exactly.
that's basically it.
Well, it's important. It's really important. We should keep an eye on that. Luggerbug says, loving Josh could listen all day. And Craig, we've got 4 times the amount of viewers than Eamon Holmes at the moment on GB News Online, which is amazing. Well done, all. I saw Eamon actually laughing about saying ITV are increasing their advertising because they're worried about him. But Eamon, are you worried about us? So anyway, listen, Josh Hamilton, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's always a pleasure, Josh, to see you.
No
and we hope to see you again very, very soon. Have a fantastic weekend. Take good care of yourself.
You too. Thanks very much, Sonia. Great to chat.
Everybody, Josh Hamilton, take good care.